his chiseled good looks, an athletic physique, and a rich baritone voice, Charlton Heston was born to portray strong, heroic leading men. His first movie success was as a tough circus manager in Cecil B. DeMille's lavish blockbuster, The Greatest Show on Earth. He later brought grit and gravitas to films like The Ten Commandments, El Cid, and Ben-Hur, which won him an Oscar in 1959. This confirmed his position as king of the Hollywood epic. A decade on, and Heston was still one of the cinema's biggest stars, scoring huge success in 1968 sci-fi classic The Planet of the Apes. We join Heston first in a 1969 appearance on the BBC programme Movie Makers at the National Film Theatre, and an interview which begins with him discussing his first big break.
How did you first attract the attention of DeMille?
Well, that's
interesting.
interesting. I had made one picture, a modern dress role, a modern part, which was interesting enough, but in no way distinguished. And I was driving off the lot one day. DeMille had a gate of his own called the DeMille Gate next to the building. It wasn't just for him. You could drive through it, but it was called the DeMille Gate. As well it might have been. The profits from his films built half that studio. And Paramount has never achieved the success and eminence it had when he was contributing a film or two every few years. And I was driving off through the DeMille Gate one day, and he was standing on the steps of the building where his offices were with a coterie of the people that worked for him, including a secretary who did not, as was reputed, take down every word he said, but she took down a large part of what he said. She had an uncanny instinct for knowing what he might later want to refer to, and she always took that down. And I had, in fact, been presented to him as one of the sights of the lot when I was first there, and kind of like a major monument. You know, I was taken on a tour of the public buildings, and DeMille was certainly among those. And so when I drove past him, I thought, well, I have met him, I should at least wave. So I waved in what I felt was a companionable way. And as was later reported to me, he turned to his secretary and he said, "Who's that?" And his secretary flipped back and she said, "That's Charlton Heston. He's a New York stage actor. He's acted in 3 plays in New York. He was signed by Hal Wallace last March. He's done 1 picture called Dark City. You ran it 2 weeks ago. You didn't like it." And he said, "Yes, but I like the way you waved." And he said, "We better have him in about the circus picture. Have him come in." So I was duly called in. I made 2 pictures for DeMille eventually, and the procedure before you were cast for a part by DeMille was, in my experience, unchangeable. He never would say, "I'm considering you for this part." He would just talk about the part, and you were occasionally looked to for a reaction of some sort, which obviously would be positive. And then he would say goodbye and had a nice chat of 20 minutes or so, and perhaps in 3 weeks' time or a month's time, you'd be called back again. I think in the circus picture, I went back 6 or 7 times. And each time the procedure was essentially the same. And there were never any progress reports about how you were moving up in the running or anything. He would just go through the same thing, and each time you'd say, "Gee, that certainly sounds like a marvelous role." You know? And at least I never thought of anything cleverer than that to say. And finally, I was informed that I had the part. But I have always been convinced that one of the main reasons I got it was that I waved when I drove out through that gate. I always wave at everybody now.
I wanted to ask Charlton Heston whether he preferred playing costume parts to modern-day parts.
I don't know if it's so much a matter of preference. I seem to be first in line for most of them. Most of the parts that are submitted to me seem to be period parts. I think this has partly to do with my face. I don't seem to have a 20th century face. I have a theory about that. I think there are actors who belong in different periods. Humphrey Bogart comes to mind as an outstanding example of for the whole world, the urban 20th century American face. Now, whether this is in fact what the urban 20th century American man is like, it's what the world thinks he was like and what the urban 20th century man would like to think he's like. William Holden is a good example of any kind of a 20th century, not necessarily urban type. Henry Fonda is a marvelous early American figure. It's clear how this has been recognized, perhaps subconsciously, by producers. He's somehow terribly persuasive. Conversely, if you put Humphrey Bogart, even as towering a figure in films and as fine an actor as he was, in a period role, he would... I remember I saw, as it happens, the only Western he ever made, which was called The Oklahoma Kid. And it had Humphrey Bogart in sideburns and black gloves. And for some reason, you never believed it for a second. Not for a second. I suppose it's partly a question of experience in a certain kind of role. It's interesting, even actors who have done Shakespeare all their lives on the stage and worn cloaks almost as much as they've worn shirts and ties. I always take a secret pleasure in watching an actor who has never gotten on a horse in a cloak. And he invariably ends up with the cloak between his legs. And you just acquire a certain, this may be part of it, a certain ease in handling the wardrobe. I honestly think the face is the main thing, though, for reasons neither I nor the audience is aware of. My face seems to be acceptable in almost any period but the 20th century.
You talked a lot about your DeMille epics. What about your Bronston epics, in particular El Cid, which I regard your best film?
I think El Cid came very close to what it might have been. As I've said, I think the epic film is the most difficult genre in which to succeed creatively. Or to put it another way, it's the easiest film to make lousy. It's terribly easy to let the whole thing just dissolve in kind of a seething minestrone of extras with torches in which individual performers disappear completely. And having escaped so successfully with the invaluable help of William Wyler in Ben-Hur, I felt a bit edgy about undertaking it again, but the character was an enormously attractive one. It had an advantage over Ben-Hur in that it was a real person. The Cid was undoubtedly one of the most remarkable men of the Middle Ages, and very much, apparently, on the not insignificant record, very much as we sketched him in the film.
does Calahorra belong?
Calahorra belongs to Ferdinand and to Castile.
El Cid is one of the films I would love to be able to make again. I think it's perhaps true to say it's a good film. I think, given the material and the character, it could be a great, great film. The character offers as much potential for a truly great film, perhaps the definitive epic film as any I've ever read, and I think I've read most of the material for all the epic films that have been made in the last 15 years.
2 years later, Heston was appearing on the Parkinson program and being introduced with a clip of perhaps his most famous scene, the chariot race from Ben-Hur.
Thank you. That was a short clip from possibly the most spectacular sequence ever filmed, the chariot race from Ben-Hur. We'll be showing you the result of it later. But better than that, we've got the man who won it. My very special guest tonight is a superstar, one of the most gilt-edged box office stars going. In more than 20 years in film and theatre, he's played just about every notable worth knowing, including Moses, John the Baptist, Ben-Hur, El Cid, Michelangelo, Thomas Jefferson and General Gordon, as well as the off-camera version of Franklin D. Roosevelt and God. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Charlton Heston.
Thank you for an enormously graceful introduction. I feel in the interests of establishing myself with your audience on a completely honest basis, I should make clear that that chariot race you just showed me winning was fixed.
Can I talk to you? I mentioned there lots of the marvelous epic hero roles that you've played. What is it about you, Mr. Heston, do you think that makes you so suited for this kind of role?
I think the broken nose. More than anything.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because without appearing to be rude, I mean, is the face a gift of God or an accident?
I think the significant feature is an accident, which is the broken nose. I played a bit of football when I was in school, not very well. And in one of the last games I played, I failed to catch a pass. This is American football.
Yes, I know.
And caught instead the opposing tackler's knee in the middle of my face. And it completely removed any interest in further football for me. And happily, I'm honestly convinced, provided me with a very valuable item of professional equipment.
In what way?
I can't really detail why this should be so, but I know that at least 3 parts Michelangelo that I've played, which were very useful to me, Michelangelo, Moses, and Andrew Jackson, I was in part chosen for because I had some resemblance to, in the case of Moses, the Michelangelo statue of Moses, which is the most well-known and effective rendition. In the case of Andrew Jackson and the role of Michelangelo himself, 2 paintings of the men themselves. Yes. And the broken nose was a significant feature in each case. So I've often thought of trying to figure out who that opposing player was that broke it and sending him a large present.
You're not, I mentioned in my introduction to you that you've been a top box office star for a long, long time now. But you're not a sex symbol like, say...
No, that wasn't where I was kneed. You've got it wrong.
But, yes, you're not a sex symbol like McQueen or, say, Robert Redford. But why is it, do you think, that you are one of the top box office drawers?
This is honestly a question that depends on so many intangibles. I suspect in large part, in the first place, any actor who works is a lucky actor. Any actor who has good parts is an even luckier one. And I think in my case, I had the enormous good fortune to appear in the case of 3 of the films, 3 films that are among the top-grossing films of all time. Now, one of them was made by C.B. DeMille. One of them was directed by William Wyler and had that chariot race in it. Mm. And I can't claim a great deal of credit for the success of either film.
Yes.
And given that kind of a running start, if you can't limp home as some kind of a box office draw, you better turn in your suit.
But I was thinking more in terms of personal appeal, and I think you're selling yourself short here. I saw a...
Well, you sell me long.
Well, I'll put a point to you then that I saw a quote in one magazine where it said that it analysed your appeal. It said that your appeal was that you looked virile without being lecherous.
I've got to work on that. Of course, when you think of it, it's better than looking lecherous without being virile.
You mentioned a moment ago the fact that you've been in 3 of the biggest box office movies of all time. 50 million people, in fact, saw one of your movies. You've got one of the most recognizable faces of anyone on this planet. Has that ever led you into any extraordinary situation? You've been recognized in peculiar circumstances.
Well, what is the converse is the likelier event. Any public person gets very involved in his own recognizability and imagines that it is far more universal than it is. I remember the best story I know illustrating that happened when Ben-Hur had been in release some months, and didn't happen to me, but to a friend of mine, now the late Jeff Chandler. And he said someone came up to him in the street one day and stopped him most politely and said, "Excuse me, sir, I hate to intrude in the privacy of a public person, but I cannot let the opportunity pass to tell you what a moving, creative performance you gave in Ben-Hur." And Jeff said, well, thank you very much, but that wasn't me, that was another fellow. The man staggered back and he said, well, if you aren't Burt Lancaster, who the hell are you? In terms of my own experience of confrontations of that kind, in which one's ego always comes out slightly bruised, I'm frequently taken for, I guess most frequently for Burt Lancaster.
Really?
Sometimes for other actors. I've accepted any number of compliments on my performance in Elmer Gantry, which I always say, yes, that's one of my best roles.
Did you always want to be an actor, Mr. Heston? Was that always a childhood ambition of yours?
Ever since I can remember, which is a foolish thing to say because it's a foolish ambition. It's a ridiculous profession in which to attempt to make a living. And I can't think how I could have imagined that I would be able to do so.
What was the fundamental drive when you were young, though? What was it?
It's lovely to answer that kind of a question with profound observations on one's desire to comment on one's time and to shape with one's art the minds of the world. But I suspect for many artists, certainly many actors, beyond question in my case, was a simpler thing. Ever since I was a boy, I've enjoyed pretending to be other people and have found that I was able to make a living doing it.
But why was that? Was it a kind of an escape from an unhappy childhood? Or
Not
what?
an unhappy childhood, a rather lonely one. I was raised in a very remote part of Michigan where there were few children, no children my own age. I must be one of the few members of my generation that went to a one-room school. There were 13 pupils in 8 grades, 3 of whom are my cousins. And so the fact that I got the role of Santa Claus in the Christmas play was not really a tribute to my ability, as to the fact that they were rather short on candidates. And I think my father used to read stories to me, Shakespeare included, and of course they didn't have television then, and indeed where I lived they didn't have a movie. And it was pleasant to me to act out the stories. I think surely all children play pretend games.
Oh, surely.
I think.
Of course they do, yes.
I think children tend to be natural actors.
Yes.
And I never stopped liking to do that, and it seemed an almost inevitable segue into finding myself doing it in school and winning a scholarship or two and getting into better schools, and suddenly, unaccountably, and that word is not idly chosen, unaccountably finding myself making a living doing it.
Can I ask you, in those early days as a child, and it sounds an impertinent question, it doesn't mean to be one, were you in fact ever a 7-stone weakling?
Yeah, I'm not certain how much 7 stone is, but I was
Well,
certainly...
it's a... Oh, God.
Yes. I was, let's put it this way, until I was 17, and by this time had left Michigan and was in a larger school where there were, you know, the normal run of kids. Till I was 17, I was the smallest boy in my class.
Really?
Yes. And...
did you ever consciously work at the idea of getting bigger? You know,
No.
like the guy who gets sand kicked in his eyes and this sort of thing.
No, I never did. That, I think, is a legacy from my father.
Yeah.
And I work a great deal now at not getting bigger here. But
Can I move you on a piece now? You went, first of all, you had your early training on the stage. Those were fairly hard times for you, weren't they?
in common, surely, with every actor, yes. My wife and I went to New York after I got out of the Army, and I made my living, such as it was, posing for life classes in the Art Students League in New York.
Really?
Yes, very cold, very drafty. And then fortunately began to get parts on the stage. And then, again, the element of luck. Live television and I came along at the same time, as indeed was true for a number of other actors, Paul Newman, Julie Harris, Maureen Stapleton,
Yeah.
Steve McQueen, directors like Frank Schaffner. There's a whole generation. I guess this is perhaps less true in England, but in America, there's a whole generation of actors and directors and writers whose careers were lifted into viability by live television.
It seems from all that I've read about you and know about you, they sort of consciously reject Hollywood society. Is that so?
No, it's no critical choice is involved there. No condemnation is implied. I make my living in a profession that requires some sort of athletic condition and a good night's sleep. And you can't participate very enthusiastically in a social life in Hollywood or anywhere else and achieve those two ends. On top of which, the glamorous Hollywood life of which we've all read for the past 2 generations has perhaps largely disappeared. And I have happily a home up on an isolated ridge from which a very perceptive friend of mine pointed out when he saw me building the house. He said, "You really picked a good spot to pour boiling oil and rocks down on, can't you?" And my family is there, and my friends, and a tennis court. And when I'm not working, which takes up a lot of my energy and a lot of my time, I like to be there.
Can I finally ask you, when you mentioned this thing about keeping fit, and one thinks of all the roles that you've played, you obviously do have to keep yourself in enormous trim. You don't use doubles, do you?
For jumping over chariots and falling off horses, I do.
You did in Ben-Hur, did you, for the falling off sequence?
Yes, I learned to drive the chariot.
Yes.
Mind you, in a fixed race, as we say. But I did not, I hasten to add, do the jump. The man who did the jump, Joe Cannot, interestingly enough, is the man that directed all our action sequences in Antony and Cleopatra.
Yes.
He's, I think, the best stuntman in the world, and rapidly becoming, as his father was before him,
yes,
the one of the best second unit directors.
Yes.
But the scene in which the Ben-Hur's chariot jumps, a wrecked chariot,
yes,
was that was Joe.
Yes, it's extraordinary, because we're going to see it in a moment. In fact, we'll run the clip now, because he goes up in the air and drops down, doesn't he, at full speed on the
Yes.
chariot. Right, here we are then, and it's neck and neck between
Ben-Hur.
Judah Ben-Hur and Stephen Boyd. You really could see that sequence 100 times and still pick things out of it, which are quite
Every time
remarkable.
I see it, I get anxious, thinking, what if I don't win this time?
Was that the most demanding part, do you think, physically demanding, that you had to play?
Well, the learning to drive the chariot was certainly an enormously complicated problem for me.
Yes.
Even to learn to drive it in a fixed race.
Yes.
Fortunately, I had 3 months in which to do it, to learn it before,
Yes.
and which was an enormous asset.
Yes.
It implanted in me a lifelong resolve whenever I have to learn to do anything difficult, like capturing Spain or parting the Red Sea, to get a lot of lead time.
But is there any epic part left that you'd love to play, any epic character? I see that there was a marvellous piece in one magazine I read where it said that you've got to hang around until it's time to make the epic on LBJ. You wouldn't fancy that part?
I've always wanted to play, of course, Macbeth, which I've done several times on stage and television. I'd like to do that again. Oddly enough, I've been offered William the Conqueror, and I said at the time, I said, that's not the interesting part. He's just a winner and a kind of a dull guy. The interesting character in that event is Harold of England, whose one-year reign was one of the most remarkable in English history.
Yeah. Could I finally ask you, Mr. Heston, the trend nowadays in the cinema is toward permissiveness and sex. Is it one that you're going to join?
I think to a certain extent, both artists and audiences are the prisoners of this trend more than they shape it. And I think it is, as most events in human history have proved to be, pendulum-like in its action. Almost everything goes one way and then the other. When the trend, as you suggest, moved towards more permissive exploration of erotic elements in the theater and film, most filmmakers welcomed it as a freer time.
Yes.
New freedom of art. I would only observe that so far it seems to have provided more freedom than it has art.
The final message would seem to be sort of keep your toga on.
Exactly. Yes. I play so many parts in chainmail underwear anyway. It's very hard to get out.
Charlton Heston, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The 1970s saw Heston adding his stature to the blockbusting disaster movies Earthquake and Airport 75. In the 80s, he moved to television with a leading role in a glossy soap opera, The Colbys. But he also found time to indulge a lifelong love of the theatre, with his 1987 appearance on The Wogan Show, coming just before he was due to perform as Sir Thomas More in the play A Man for All Seasons.
Well, Sir Thomas More, how do you like to be addressed? As Sir Thomas or?
Tommy's all right.
Tommy?
Yes.
Or Mr. Heston or?
Chuck is fine.
Chuck?
Yes.
You're not crazy about Charlton?
No, my mother calls me Charlton, and Mr. Cecil B. DeMille used to call me Charlton, but it's a kind of an odd name, isn't it?
Yeah, and
See, if we were broadcasting this in the States where my mother might hear me, I wouldn't dare say that.
People would have to call you Charlton?
Yeah. No, my mother, though.
Yeah, yes, quite. Well, we have a football team here of that ilk as well.
Bobby Charlton.
Bobby Charlton.
Yes.
He's not a football team in himself, but almost.
Yes, almost.
That's a fabulous costume.
Thank you.
You get out of bed of a morning and leap straight into it.
Yes, just get right into it, so I get into the part, you know.
Does it help? Do you feel Sir Thomas More coming over you?
Yes,
as you get
that's
into
really true. I've played a lot of these fellows that wear dresses and things like that. And funny wigs and
You have,
noses.
haven't you? You've played...
Oh, yes. Oh,
yeah.
I've gone, on the screen, I've gone years without ever putting a pair of trousers on.
Must be, you know where to put things.
That's very difficult, yes. You're quite right.
No pockets. I've often thought I wouldn't like to be a
pockets,
woman
no.
for the same reason.
Chainmail has its drawbacks. So do togas and gowns. They're kind of spiffy, though, isn't it?
It is really, but I mean, do you like dressing up? Do you like the costuming part of
I like to
acting?
play real great men of the past. I've done perhaps more than most of my fellows, and it's an interesting challenge to play Thomas More in what is surely an English masterpiece, and to play it here in London in the first production since Paul Scofield's memorable creation of the part in 1960 as an American actor. I think an honor, truly, and we've got a marvelous company. We're having a magnificent time over at the...
You had extremely good critiques and some what I thought very cutting ones, which were based not so much on your performance, but based on the fact
the
that...
play, which is outrageous, really. This Man for All Seasons is undeniably a great play and will be performed for generations beyond us. It's
funny, Irving Wardle in The Times said that he didn't think the part of Sir Thomas More was all that great, but that you gave the definitive performance.
Well, he was very generous.
Right,
but
and other people have said, oh, they seem unable to accept you as in that... Mainly, it seems, not because of the great roles that you did on film, but mainly because of the Jason Colby part. That keeps being dragged up. Does that annoy you?
No, not really. I'll tell you the most important thing I ever learned about notices and critics, and I was grateful for Mr. Wardle's kind words and the things other people said, but I was doing a play with Laurence Olivier a number of years ago, many, many years ago, and I was young and green. And we got, and perhaps deserved, just terrible notices, and we were going to close at the end of the week, which we did. So I found myself at 2 o'clock in the morning, all alone, the opening night party having disappeared. And I was with Olivier and a bottle of brandy, and I was striving for an attitude of detachment, and I said, well, I suppose you learned to dismiss the bad notices. And he took my wrist and he said, Chuck, what's much more important and much harder, you have to learn to dismiss the good ones. And that is true.
Yes.
That's really true.
You seem attracted...
You have to do the work for the work, you know.
Yeah.
That's...
You love acting, don't you?
It's my life, yes.
Is that why you didn't pursue a career in politics, which I think you could easily have done?
I think so, yes. Indeed, I know so. However seriously I considered it, and it wasn't very serious, the thing of running for the Senate. But I thought, my word, I'll never be able to act again, never to play Macbeth again, never to play Sir Thomas More again. I didn't know at the time I was going to get another chance at it. I've done it a couple of times. But all those marvelous parts that I couldn't give it up. I couldn't bear it.
What about the part of President of America?
I've done that 3 times.
Well, of course you have.
Yes, I've been president 3 times.
Of course you have.
Yes.
But it seems to us, or it seems to me, looking at as we get into the run-up for the American election, that nobody seems particularly convincing as a candidate. Nobody seems, at least the American public don't seem convinced. I think they need another film star. I think...
I'll tell you...
If Clint Eastwood doesn't go for it, I think you should.
No, no, absolutely not. I think we've got some good candidates, and we have a rather clumsy process of sorting them out. You know, it's going to take the better part of the next 12 months to arrive at who's going to be nominated by either party, and it always seems a big kerfuffle at the beginning, and people drop out and stumble and put their feet wrong and so on. But we haven't been at it as long as you people have here, but we're still there.
Heston may not have fancied the presidency, but in his later years he was given the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the US's biggest civilian honor. He was also by then president of America's National Rifle Association, famously declaring that anyone challenging his right to bear arms would have to take his weapon from his cold, dead hands. In 2002, Heston announced that he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. 6 years later, at the age of 84, he died at his home in Beverly Hills. At the time, it was said that his passing marked the end of an iconic age of cinema, and that if Hollywood had a Mount Rushmore, Charlton Heston's face would surely be on it.
Robert Redford's talking pictures later, after he stars in All the President's Men next.